We're property entrepreneurs. And an entrepreneur, if you think about it, is a problem solver. And this lady, she's not a dumb person, she's a smart lady. She just hadn't been thinking that way. Problem is, there's 100K of equity tied up, which could be used to buy other deals. So quite rightly, my student thought, well, okay, how about if in a completely unrelated separate transaction, she could give her daughter the £100,000 profit. So it's all about thinking, what's the end game I want to achieve, and what are the different ways, what are the different creative strategies I can use to get to that end point. It's important, I think, a general business principle, always look, how can you add value to other people so they value what you do and they'll be happy to work with you. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Property Magic Podcast, in which I'm going to share with you how you can do better property deals by thinking more creatively. So I think that as a property investor, we're actually entrepreneurs. We're property entrepreneurs. And an entrepreneur, if you think about it, is a problem solver. An entrepreneur spots a problem in the market, they come up with a solution that people are prepared to pay for, but we're just property entrepreneurs. So we are property problem solvers. And if you go into negotiation discussions with property owners with that in mind, that I'm a property problem solver, it's amazing what can happen. So let me give you two examples of conversations that I've had very recently where actually there are some really interesting propositions. When you speak to a seller, they often have a plan in their mind. They've got an idea of doing something and they've come up with a solution and they want to find a way of doing that solution. But that solution may not be the only way of achieving what they want to achieve. Let me give you my first example. So I was speaking at the Property Investor Show, which is a big exhibition, happens twice a year at Excel in London. I've been speaking there for the last 21 years, ever since I set up the Property Investors Network. And at the last show, I was speaking, and a lady came up to me afterwards and said, look, Simon, I've got a property I need to sell. So I said, tell me about the property. And this is just a one-bedroom flat in London. She had said it was worth about £250,000 and she was getting about £1,500 in rental income. So not an exactly exciting deal. It's not going to set the world on fire, that deal. And she was struggling to sell the property in the current property market. Now, I asked her the question, why do you want to sell that property? By the way, it's got no mortgage on it. I said, why do you want to sell it? She said, I want to get the money so I can do another property deal. I said, okay, tell me about that other property deal. So this lady had found a large property deal up in the northeast of England. I won't say exactly where it was, but basically this was a former hotel that had a pub attached to it, had a couple of other commercial units, it had a semi-detached house, and also it had a couple of apartments. So a big piece of land, and it was on the market for about $410,000. Now, this is a very depressed area. That's quite a lot of money in this particular area. But she explained to me that it was a very good rental. There was income from the hotel, from the pub, from the leases on the cafe, the commercial units, and also the residential properties. And actually, it was a pretty good cash flow from the property. And I said, why is the owner selling? And she said, they just want to retire. They want to get out of the business. And I said to her, well, who's going to take on the, you don't really want to be running that business. She said, no, there are managers in place. I can buy it, leave all the management team in place. So it sounds like a good deal. So I said, okay, so why do you need the money? She said, I need the money for the deposit. And I said, do you really need the money for the deposit? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, you could just remortgage rather than selling that rental property in London, why not just remortgage it and get a big chunk of cash out to use on this or other deals? I said, it won't be enough. I said, well, okay, why not find a joint venture partner? Maybe someone else can put the money in. He said, well, how would that work? I said, well, look, you found the deal. You're going to do all the work. There are people who might be able to put the money in. It's something you're probably not going to be able to refinance. You need to leave money in there. But if they're getting a good enough return on it, they might be very happy for that. And also they're getting a share of the potential capital growth over time. And this lady, she's not a dumb person. She's a smart lady. She just hadn't been thinking that way. And this is where we need to apply creative thinking to all the property deals. When we find a seller who wants to sell a property, we need to understand, what are they actually trying to achieve? Yes, they're trying to sell this property, but why? What's the problem they're trying to solve? What are they going to do with the money? Because maybe we have a different way of giving them the solution they're looking for. So in other words, this lady I spoke to at the property show, she gets to keep her London property. She can just refinance that and use that money for another deal. And then she could potentially joint venture on this larger deal up in the Northeast using very little or in fact none of her own money. So let me give you another example of creative thinking. So one of my mastermind students, she is in a fortunate position that her mother is gifting a property to her daughter. And the property is probably worth about 200,000. There's a mortgage on there of just under 100,000. And the mother has said, look, you can just have the property. So my student has said, okay, how do I get the most out of this opportunity? She could just buy the property at the purchase price of, say, 100,000, there'd be 100,000 equity there. She'd have a very low mortgage and she'd have a great cash flow from the property, which is one solution. The problem is there's 100K of equity tied up, which could be used to buy other deals. So quite rightly, my student thought, well, okay, how about if I go to a bridging company? She has got the normal deposit to put in. If I go to a bridging company, they can lend me the money based on the value, not the purchase price, give me most of the cash. I can then buy that and then 6 months later remortgage onto a normal mortgage. Again, that is a great strategy and it means a small amount of money up front. The only problem with that is that with all the costs of the bridging and then a new remortgage, there's all these extra costs which I don't think she needs. So given the fact that it's her mother who's going to give her this property, I said, well, what you could do is you could buy the property at the genuine full value of £200,000. It doesn't make any difference to the mother because it's her residential property. She's got no tax to pay on it anyway. So buy the property at the full 200, get a normal 75% mortgage at 150, put in the 50K, which she has or she could borrow from someone else. And then once the mother's got all the money, in a completely unrelated separate transaction, she could give her daughter the £100,000 profit. And her daughter could then pay back the 50K, or if she put her own money in, get that back. And she's got £50,000 of equity, cash, that she can use in another deal. So it's all about thinking, what's the end game I want to achieve? And what are the different ways, what are the different creative strategies I can use to get to that end point? And especially when we're dealing with motivated sellers who've got a problem they want to fix, they're sometimes a bit tunnel vision. They're looking at the one way that they've worked out they can solve the problem. And one of the skills you want to develop is being able to ask great questions, to listen to what they're saying, to work out what's most important, and then really come up with a number of different solutions that can help them get the end game. And hopefully, at least one of those solutions is not only going to be better for the seller than the alternative, also it's better for you. And this is where we come up with this ethical win-win that helps you get a great property deal, but you're giving the seller what they want. And if you give the other person what they want, they're more likely to give you what you want. And this is why creative thinking is so important. So I'd really encourage you, whenever you go into a property deal, particularly if you're thinking about, I want to do rent to rent, or I want to do this particular strategy, it's good to be focused, but if you're too tunnel visioned, you might miss loads of deals that you could potentially do that are right there in front of you just because you're being a bit too focused. So the idea is we want to try and think nice and big, have a very creative thinking style, and also we want to remember we are a property problem solver. Let's understand what's the true problem for this property owner. How can we potentially solve that problem in a win-win solution? And if you become good at solving people's problems, if you're adding value to their life, that's how you can make a lot of money. And it's important, I think, a general business principle, always look, how can you add value to other people so they value what you do and they'll be happy to work with you. So I do hope this has been useful, stimulating your thinking about you want to become this creative property problem solver. And it takes a little bit of practice. And one of the ways you can develop your skill and knowledge is by looking at case studies, looking at what other people like you have done, and the different types of creative strategies and deals, and that will stimulate your thinking and help you find more solutions when you're trying to come up with this ethical win-win solution for the seller. With that in mind, I am doing some online training all about how you can buy property using other people's money. So click on the link in the description below, in the show notes, and come and join me on that online training to understand how you can grow your portfolio and stop limiting yourself by just the resources you have open to you. So I do hope this podcast has been useful. As ever, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. Now, if you're watching on the YouTube as opposed to listening to the audio, please like the channel, please subscribe to it and hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified anytime a new podcast comes out. Until the next episode, I've got lots of other videos here for you to watch, lots of free content about some amazing strategies, including some of the creative financing strategies, which I think you should definitely be using in today's buyer's market. So as ever, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. Enjoy the next video.